After getting routed by the Orioles in the first two games, it is all the more impressive that the Sox crushed Baltimore in the series finale to snap a 12-game losing streak. Let's discuss how impressive a rare victory was next on Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and the site expert of Southside Showdown, part of the Fansided Network. You can check out my written content at SouthsideShowdown.com, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, follow or subscribe to the show on wherever you get your podcasts, as Locked On White Sox is available via audio on places such as Apple and Spotify. The Chicago White Sox third double-digit losing streak is over, and it came most unexpectedly with an 8-1 victory over the Baltimore Orioles. While the Orioles won the series and blew the Sox out in the first two games, it is worth discussing a rare, impressive win, especially when it looked like that losing skid could go on for a while. Luis Robert Jr. exited the game with hamstring tightness. Given his injury history and struggling season, should the Sox just shut him down for the rest of the year? I'll discuss that in the second segment. And finally, I sat down with Greg Prince from the popular New York Mets blog Faith and Fear in Flushing to discuss Met fans' desire to see the Sox take over the most defeats in a season, while players from the 62 Mets do not want to see that evil put upon the franchise. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use code all lowercase LockedOnMLB to win $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. Prize Picks, run your game. Well, in a miserable season where the Sox have had three double-digit losing streaks, the first which set a franchise record for longest losing streak in a season, the second which set the all-time franchise record and tied an AL record, it seemed like this latest one could threaten to be the longest. I mean, it was really looking like, were the Sox ever going to get a victory in September? And then Nicky Lopez hit a very rare leadoff homer to start the game. And it was one of those games where the variance of baseball finally smiled upon the White Sox. And that is the most impressive part of the Sox getting a rare win, especially against the Orioles, that I want to discuss. The other impressive parts that I want to tackle is Jonathon Cannon going from looking shaky at the start of the game to, being that guy that ends losing streaks. And the bullpen, they had a rare shutdown night that's worth noting, and the Sox hit some home runs to pick up this win that I want to discuss. So let's get back to the variance part. As one of the cruel parts of this season is, the variance part really not shining upon the White Sox is one reason on the Dead Sea Scroll sized list of why the Sox are nearing 110 losses. Baseball is random. It's a random sport. There are nights where you're just going to run in to a pitcher who's just maybe, is struggling and has his best stuff that day, and you're not going to get a hit. On the reverse side, you're going to face an ace who's just not going to have his command, and you're going to take advantage of that. But that has rarely happened to the White Sox this season. You get that night where the opposing pitcher, just maybe throws a couple of wild pitches. You get a couple of errors and a couple of big hits, and that leads to a victory. But again, that didn't happen, for example, in the 21-game losing streak. The luck went against the White Sox. The variance went against the White Sox. And, that's a big reason, I would say, that the White Sox are not at their Pythagorean record of 39-102. And think about it. That might only be 7 extra wins. But when you're talking about chasing down the 1962 New York Mets and the 1916 Philadelphia A's for the worst record ever, those 7 games matter, as you're not having that conversation. I mean, you're just, you're already past the 16 Philadelphia A's, who had 36 wins that year, and you're 1 win back of the Mets for the 62 record. Instead, the White Sox now have to find a way to get 11 more victories to make sure that they're not the worst all-time team ever. But hey, when Nicky Lopez starts a game with a leadoff homer, you best win that game. because him hitting home runs is very, 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 very rare. That was his 7th career home run. So you got to capitalize on that. However, Jonathon Cannon gave up the lead in the bottom of the first when Gunnar Henderson crushed a leadoff solo shot of his own, and that broke Cal Ripken Jr.'s record for home runs by a shortstop in the Baltimore Orioles franchise history. And the Baltimore Orioles have had some very, very good shortstops. Then Adley Rutschman, he followed up with a single, and it was like, oh boy, here we go. So the Sox have now blown another lead. You got their offense going. Cannon, he's been shaky lately with his command. This might be one where, this is going to get out of hand just like the first two ones got out of hand. But instead, gets the double play and then gets a ground out to end the inning. And then he cruised through 5 2/3 innings where he gave up 1 run, 5 hits, walked 1, and struck out 4. And it's the second time one of his solid starts helped snap a double-digit losing streak. The guy is a losing skid snapper. At least that's what John Triffin wanted you to believe in the television broadcast. But I wanted to be like, John, he was also on the mound for a couple of the losses during these losing streaks. But he was on the mound on August 6th in Oakland when the Sox snapped that 21-game losing streak. And again, he was on the mound last night to snap the 12-game losing streak. More impressive was the Sox got 6 runs on Albert Suarez, who's been pitching great this season. I mean, there's talk that he might start game 1 of the ALDS for the Baltimore Orioles, or game 1 if they're in the wild card round, depending on where they get seeded in the playoffs. But that's the thing. The Sox beat a playoff team, and they crushed them, and they crushed one of their best pitchers. I know Corbin Burns is probably may start game 1, but they might decide to have him start game 2. But either way, Albert Suarez is going to start a playoff game with the season he's having. And this had all the makings of the White Sox getting swept, especially with Suarez on the mound. But didn't have his best stuff. Sox take advantage. Andrew Vaughn hits a 2-run homer. Dominic Fletcher hits a solo homer. Heck, Lenyn Sosa went 3 for 4 with 2 RBIs and a homer. And a run. So when you get Nicky Lopez hitting a leadoff home run and a very good game from Lenyn Sosa, you best be winning that game, and that's what they did. And Dominic Fletcher, defensive god. Yes, I'm going to put that on him. He's a fielding god. Made a great defensive play to get Cedric Mullins out at third. I believe it was in the 2nd inning. Makes a great catch and then just guns him down as Mullins tags up. Inning over. Those are the things that you need, because Cannon did allow base runners in the first 3 innings. He got, clean through the 4th and the 5th, clean through the 4th, and then got, a couple outs before he was pulled. So it wasn't like Cannon was absolutely dominating, but got some great defensive help from Fletcher. And I think you got to hope Fletcher is, if he can just hit 260 as if he could be a career 260 hitter, and that's what you got to pray for. Just let him be an everyday player. He will be better than what he is right now, which everybody keeps saying is Adam Engel and Brian Anderson. Also fielding gods. Very good fielders. Excellent fielders. Could track down rob guys of hits. But I want Fletcher to be more than just a glove. And it was nice to see him get a home run. And he's been hitting very well in September. I mean, in August, he hit very well in August. And let's see that continue into September. The bullpen pitched great as Fraser Ellard, Gus Varland, and Justin Anderson went the rest of the way after Cannon was pulled. They allowed just 4 base runners, and Varland in particular was just straight up nasty, and I was impressed. And I love what Jordan Lazowski of Sox on 35th tweeted out, as I felt the same way of how Varland pitched. This is at J Lazowski 14. I respect Gus Varland simply because he's at least making me consider whether there might be somebody with the potential in the bullpen for the White Sox. And that was one of those things where, okay, he's been failed. He has failed in the past, still relatively youngish. These are the type of guys that the White Sox should be taking a shot at, like Enyel De Los Santos. Go with those guys. Let's see what they can do instead of let's seeing how Chad Kuhl does, or I would even say, Touki Toussaint. I don't want to see those guys anymore. I'd rather see Gus Varland trying to keep showing that he might be a future piece. I'd rather see Enyel De Los Santos see if he could be a future piece. But the final impressive part of the win was it was nice to see the Sox bounce back after getting trounced by a combined 22-3 in the first two games. And the night before, the White Sox were especially, even more of a clown show than they normally are. When Miguel Vargas and Andrew Benintendi collided on an Eloy Jimenez pop-up, the comical error led the Orioles announcer to actually use the White Sox name as an adjective for being a clown show, basically. He said, the White Sox just White Soxed. Basically, the White Sox are now an adjective for being a terrible baseball team. Heck, you got Jim Jordan. I don't care what your politics are. You got him tweeting out about the only thing worse than the Chicago White Sox is Kamala Harris. I mean, think about that. You got political opponents using how bad the White Sox are to show just how bad things possibly be. And again, I don't care what your politics is. I don't care who you vote for. Just vote. Anyway, maybe Grady Sizemore getting his first ejection in charge pumped them up. But I think it's more that finally variance shined in the Sox favor. However, it was not all sunshine and rainbows. Luis Robert Jr. left the game with hamstring tightness. And while Sizemore says LRJ is fine with his injury history, maybe it's time to power down Robert Jr. Let's discuss that next on Locked On White Sox. PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps, on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch those winnings roll in. PrizePicks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy, so that your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, PrizePicks, your picks are still alive. One Caleb Williams passing yard gets you one win on PrizePicks every week in September. That's right, only 1 yard gets you an automatic W every weekend in September. So that's 4 weeks of free wins. Don't miss this deal on PrizePicks because it's gone when September ends. And ready for Bears season, you can select more or less on Rome Odunze at 41.5 receiving yards against the Titans. Cole Kmet's at you can pick more or less from 23. You can select Cole Kmet's more or less at 23.5 yards or 2.5 receptions. And if you believe the Bears offense is going to be high octane, those are some good numbers to select from. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB and get $50 off. Get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. And thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On MLB podcast. Host Paul Sullivan, a.k.a. Sully, is here daily to provide national expertise with his trademark humor to help you get ready for the MLB playoffs here in the dog days of summer. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day on Locked On MLB, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And the White Sox start a 3-game road series with the Boston Red Sox tomorrow night. First pitch is at 6:10 p.m. Central Standard Time. Catch every pitch of the White Sox hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Search White Sox. And welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I am your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, follow or subscribe to the show and wherever you get your podcast. As Locked On White Sox is available via audio on places such as Apple and Spotify. Well, I keep advocating for the Chicago White Sox front office to use the rest of September as an early spring training. Get looks at young players, because the only benefit of losing 109 games this early in September is you're free of risk of having to worry about losing. You really are. At least the narrative at the end, if the Sox do break the 62 Mets record, is the team used the last month to get an evaluation on their prospects with major league potential. At least that's somewhat acceptable. It would be a footnote, but one worth noting if, say, Fletcher or even Brian Ramos, who just got called up because Brooks Baldwin just got put on the 10-day IL with a right wrist sprain, or Jairo Uriarte, if they become good players and getting that big league experience now helped in their development to get there, I'm fine. That's the only way I'll be somewhat okay if the Sox lose more than 120 games. And that is why I'm going to be cautious with Luis Robert Jr. after exiting the game in the 6th with right hamstring tightness. Just too many soft tissue injuries with him in the past. and he's having a miserable season. And you could use, if you basically shut him down now, you could use that time to get a look at Zach DeLoach and even give Oscar Colas his last chance. And yes, Luis Robert Jr. was pulled again with an injury concern. The problem for LRJ occurred on a double play he hit into, and he did not exactly run hard down to first. Came out to play the seventh, but the trainer came out and he was pulled for Corey Julks before the seventh inning started. And some fans thought that actually LRJ was being benched for not running hard, but turns out it was hamstring tightness. Now, here's what Sizemore had to say after the game, and this is from Chicago Tribune, Chicago White Sox beat reporter Lamond Pope. Quote, Luis is good. He said he was fine to stay in there. I knew coming into the game, they said he was a little tight from yesterday. Said he felt something a little bit. I just wanted to be cautious. He'll be in there Friday at Boston. Everything is good, end quote. All right, how many times have you and I heard that before a major injury has happened to LRJ or Yohan Moncada or Eloy Jimenez? Heck, Yohan Moncada, remember, like they were saying, oh, well, he was feeling a little uncomfortable. He's playing through a little bit of pain. And then boom, hip flat, hip adductor injury. Eloy Jimenez, how many times have we heard that? Well, he was dealing with something, thought he could play through it. Boom, he was on the 10-day IL. Same thing with Luis Robert Jr. And yes, Robert Jr. had a good game last night. He went 2 for 4 with an RBI, but he is hitting .219 on the year. At this point in such a lost season, and if the front office is leaning toward trading him in the offseason, be cautious and shut him down this season for the rest of the year. There's no need for him then to play the last 3 weeks. I'm sorry. And I don't care if I sound like I'm overreacting. I've seen this movie before, and it always ends like a Saw movie where John Kramer wins. Okay? It always ends with, this is probably going to be something worse. It's going to turn into something worse, and then Luis Robert Jr. is going to end up hurt. Better to preserve him as a trade asset than risk this getting worse and further depleting his value. And again, you can get a look at Zach DeLoach or even Colas. Give him that one last chance to prove he can be something in the big leagues, one or the other. And I get that. LRJ is 10 times better than those two. But for the sake of the process and avoiding turning this into a hamstring pull, sit Robert Jr. for the rest of the year and go the evaluation route. That's the process that you should be using right now. You can say the injury history and inconsistency has plunged Robert Jr.'s trade value. And I guess I'm going with the 360 view here, but you can also say he still has the talent to be worthy of building a team around too. So why trade him? But remember, the team thinks a change of, other teams think of a change of scenery is what he needs. And I'm starting to reverse course on potentially trading, Robert Jr. At first I was opposed to it, but I'm kind of reversing course now because I think he's a complementary piece. He's not a superstar. And with all the needs the Sox have, maybe leveraging him to get assets might be the best thing for the franchise to do. And you cannot get something good if Luis Robert Jr. continues to have injuries. So once again, it might help the team. Shutting him down might help the team lose more than 120 games. But preserving LRJ's health in the long run by shutting him down now might be worth that footnote. To say, oh yeah, one of the reasons why the Sox lost a lot of games in September was LRJ had some hamstring tightness, and the Sox decided to be very, very cautious. And that meant one of their best players, who, even though he's been struggling, is on the IL. I'd rather have that, and I'd also rather, again, have the process then to use that to get an evaluation on DeLoach and Colas. And again, I'm not saying that those guys are better. I'm just saying I've seen Luis Robert Jr. start off with a little bit of a nagging issue, and it turned out to be a very, very big problem. Well, speaking of losing 120 games, I spoke with a respected Mets blogger to discuss the Mets fan base's desire to see the Sox break the 1962 Mets record. Let's hear from Greg Prince of the popular Mets blog Faith and Fear in Flushing on why Mets fans wish that evil upon us Sox fans. Next on Locked On White Sox. Hey, summertime is wrapping up, and in my household, the focus is already on planning next summer's vacation. What my wife and I are planning is not going to be cheap, but hey, live a little. And one way I'm thinking about getting some extra cash for that 2025 summer trip is with Ibotta. With Ibotta, I can get cash back on all my purchases, so I can spend more time making memories this summer and less time next summer and less time dreaming about them. Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. earn on hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys. So you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what your purchase. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, that flight you've been eyeing, or that fancy dinner you've been craving. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKEDONMLB when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back and use code LOCKEDONMLB. That's IBOTTA in Google Play or the App Store and use code LOCKEDONMLB. And the White Sox start a 3-game road series with the Boston Red Sox tomorrow night. The first pitch is at 6:10 p.m. Central Standard Time. Catch every pitch of the White Sox hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Search White Sox, and welcome back into Locked On White Sox. I am your host, Todd Welter. Shout out to all my everydayers who stuck with me. Hope you enjoyed the conversation I had yesterday with Ozzie Guillen Jr. I know I said I'd probably talk about players that the White Sox should not bring back next year as one of the topics on today's episode, but the Sox actually beat the Baltimore Orioles in impressive fashion, and we rarely get to talk about wins, so I felt we got to talk about that first, and then let's talk about, hey, there's a potential injury issue with Luis Robert Jr., so that's why I made the audible. So the White Sox have to win 11 more games to avoid breaking the 1962 New York Mets for losses in a season. The Athletic had a very good piece out last week in discussing how players from that 120-loss team from the 1962 Mets do not want to see any club break it. Greg Prince from the very popular New York Mets blog, Faith and Fear in Flushing. He was quoted in that piece, and I actually got a hold of him, said, hey, can you come on and just talk about, because he said Mets fans want that evil upon the White Sox. So I asked him, hey, can you come on and just talk about why you wish that evil upon, like, say, me and my friends here? And he said, sure. So sat down with me yesterday to discuss why the Mets fans want that stink off their franchise. So want to share with you right now. All right. Thanks for joining me, Greg. First of all, where can we find your great work if you want to get any information on the Mets?
I would invite anybody to come to faithandfearinflushing.com, the blog for Mets fans who like to read. We've been doing it since 2005. My friend Jason Fry and I, after every Met game and sometimes in between seasons.
Yeah, I always want to make sure anybody that gives me their time of day that I promote their site and all that type of stuff. Now, Greg, you were quoted in the Athletic piece of saying that you're one of the fans that actually wants the White Sox to break the Mets record. Why does most of the fan base want to see the White Sox break the 1962 Mets record for most losses in a single season?
I get the feeling it's because we've lived with it for so long. It's part of our DNA at this point, part of the legend, the foundation on which we were built. I think the fact that it was the very first year has a lot to do with it. The fact that it was Casey Stengel who had made it so palatable, the idea that a team could come into existence in New York and be as bad as that team was, and yet kind of take the pressure off and make people kind of laugh at the idea of a baseball team trying to do its best and instead doing its absolute worst. I think there's always been an understanding that as an expansion team, the odds were sort of against them. In real time, you have to remember the National League had vacated the National League had vacated New York for several years, which left a gaping void for people who missed the Dodgers and missed the Giants and weren't going to root for any other local team. So you put all that together, you put the way it's been talked about for years, the fact that so many books have been written about that team, both immediately after 62, again after 1969, which is, sort of the high point of the origins of the Mets. And they win the World Series 7 years after being the worst team ever. Listening to our announcers through the years, even if you didn't live through 62, I was only born then. I don't have many in utero memories, unfortunately, but it just became part of our vocabulary and has been passed down, passed along. So when we're faced the idea that this thing that's made us kind of special is about probably to evaporate, I think it's a little jarring. So I've had 62 years of it being part of us. I think that's plenty. In fact, I think it's kind of poetic, 62 after 62. I'm willing to pass the torch with absolutely no malice toward the White Sox or any other team that would break the record, but I think it's time.
I know because I read your bio that you really got into the Mets in 1969, but did you have family members that were kind of into the team at the beginning? And if so, did they share any stories of just how bad that 62 season was for the Mets?
No, when it comes to baseball, it feels like I might have been adopted because neither of my neither of my parents were really baseball fans. They certainly hadn't kept up. They both claimed Brooklyn Dodger fanhood in their youth, but that seemed to have gone away and not been picked up. Um, if anything, as the years went by, I developed this historical fascination for the New York Giants. So don't have a whole lot of influence where that's concerned. Though I will say one thing that's occurred to me in the wake of this past weekend and visiting the White Sox and how much attention the 62 Mets are getting. A la Willie Mays passing away earlier this year, there was so much talk about the New York Giants that you might have thought that they were still playing at the Polo Grounds. Same for the original Mets. So much talk about them, and you realize that this may be the last time we hear about those guys, let alone from those guys. So that's kind of sad.
Speaking of the 62 Mets, again, you were quoted in a great athletic piece. It's over. It was last weekend. If you don't have a subscription, I highly suggest somebody getting it. What was your reaction when you saw a lot of those 62 Mets going, I don't wish that evil on any of these current White Sox players? What was your reaction to that?
I wasn't surprised because I remember 21 years ago, the last time this record was seriously pursued in the wrong direction by the 2003 Tigers, who it will be recalled went 43 and 119, and they needed a 6-game winning streak at the very end of the season to avoid the infamy of something like 40 and 120. The Mets had a rainout and a tie and a suspended game that was supposed to be replayed but wasn't. So that's how come it's only 160 games. But gentlemen like Craig Anderson and Jay Hook and some of their teammates who are no longer with us had expressed at the time in 2003 that they wouldn't wish this on those Tigers or anybody because they know what it's like to have carried the burden all these years, even though it is embraced in a certain way and there's a lot of warmth around it. And I don't think anybody's holding a grudge against them among Mets fans who might have lived through it. But I guess there's just this sense of empathy that those guys have developed over time. So I wasn't terribly surprised.
I know I said I was going to only ask you 3 questions, but a couple of things have just sparked my interest. How did winning the 1969 World Series kind of make that 62 team? I know Casey Stengel kind of made it lovable, but how did winning that 69 series though make the 62 Mets kind of seem, part of the Amazins? That was kind of their catchphrase, if I remember correctly. I know there was that movie. What was it? Oh God, I just forgot it. It had Randy Quaid in it, where he's Frequency, where he's talking about the Amazins.
Yeah,
How did that kind of help soften the 62 Mets?
yeah, that was Dennis Quaid actually.
Dennis Quaid, there, yeah, not Randy Quaid. He's crazy.
I think there's just the fact that any team that wins a World Series is going to be revered within the fan base. The fact that the 69 Mets did it after 7 seasons of never having had a winning record, and the first 4 of those seasons having been incredibly historically dreadful, never fewer than 109 losses in any of those years. So it wasn't just 62, but 62 had set the bar. I don't know if you want to say high exactly, but for tolerance of losing. And as those stories and those legends kind of became embedded, and I'd throw in the name Ed Kranepool here. Ed Kranepool was the Mets' big prospect in 1962, signed right out of high school before there was a draft. And he's up with the team by the end of the year, even though he's only 17 years old. And he's learning to play first base from none other than Gil Hodges, who's pretty much at the end of the line there. Well, as go the 60s and Ed Kranepool, so go the Mets. He never becomes that star that he was envisioned to be. And the first part of his career, he's one of those players who the fans kind of take out their frustrations on. A famous sign that went up at Shea Stadium from the stands circa 1965 when Ed Kranepool was 21 is Ed Kranepool over the hill. You get to 1969, and Ed Kranepool is now one of the world champion Mets. And as the 70s progress, for better or mostly as the decade went on worse, Ed Kranepool is still there. Ed Kranepool holds the record for most seasons as a Met, 18. I don't think anybody's ever going to break that. He started early and he played his entire career with the franchise. So he became kind of the living embodiment of what can happen if you hang in there long enough. And Ed Kranepool, game 3 of the 1969 World Series, he hits a home run. He reaches the pinnacle that year. And 62 just becomes part of the backstory at that point. And I think you take Ed Kranepool and you multiply that, and this feeling of, boy, we sure came a long way fast. And there is a film clip of Casey Stengel, kind of shining it on for the media, going on about his amazing Mets, and it was understood that it was with a wink. Yeah, they're amazing, sure they are. Well, the 1969 team added a whole new dimension to what it meant to be the amazing Mets, and that's why they make movies with people named Quaid in them, and we continue to talk about them all these years later.
All right, final question here. Your team is now owned by Steve Cohen. My team's owner, Jerry Reinsdorf, did not want him joining the ownership fraternity. What is it like, though, to have an owner that is willing to spend money, even though it wasn't spent well last year? I mean, they're on now pace to make the playoffs potentially make the playoffs this year. What's it like to have an owner? Because Sox fans, we don't have that. We don't have that knowledge.
We were in a similar boat up until a few years ago, pre-Steve Cohen, when this was a Wilpon production, and Fred Wilpon and his son Jeff, whether they had the resources or not, did not have the wherewithal to spend wisely or consistently. So I know how it is. Let me just tell you, on the grass being greener on the other side, it is. It's a very nice feeling. It hasn't won us anything yet. We had one playoff year 2 years ago, and then suddenly we were, and I can't say in the toilet because I'm talking to somebody who watches a team that's doing what it's doing. But we did not have a good year last year, as you intimated. But the fact that you have an owner with the resources and the wherewithal to spend means that when you do make mistakes, when maybe Max Scherzer is past his prime, maybe there's no need for Justin Verlander to be here, you can eat the contracts and bring back prospects who haven't shown up yet at the major league level, but we have that to look forward to. But you can start over on the fly, which is something I can't imagine having been done before Steve Cohen. Again, I guess if he thought we're just throwing good money after bad, it would probably stop after a while. And I think there was this sense of, I'll just sign every free agent out there and that'll do it. And like I said, kind of helped in 2022, not so much in 23. The ability to correct mistakes and hire the right people like David Stearns and Carlos Mendoza, I think has all contributed to that. But again, having lived without that for decades, it's fantastic. And I certainly hope somebody buys the White Sox, does the right thing by them. Because I got to tell you, as much as I do want to see the record go away and belong to somebody else, I have nothing against the White Sox. Always had this sort of other league empathy for them. 1969, the year I came to baseball, who is the Mets' rival? It's the Cubs. Who is on the other side of town from the Cubs? A team I like just because they're not the Cubs. And I could tell you other reasons as well. I visited Comiskey Park once and fell in love with it. And I don't even resent the White Sox for taking Tom Seaver from us that one time they did. So I have a couple of friends who are White Sox fans. My heart would ache for them if they weren't so disgusted with Reinsdorf themselves. So get through this year, and when the time does come and when better days come, it'll be all the sweeter because you guys survived a year like this.
Well, Greg, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. Now go check out the Locked On MLB podcast. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day. You can find the link to Locked On MLB in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I'll be back tomorrow with James Fox from Future Sox to discuss their latest top 30 prospects list. Feel free to leave comments about today's topics regarding the Sox finding a way to beat the Orioles and snapping a 12-game losing streak, Luis Robert Jr.'s latest injury, and if he just should be shut down for the rest of the season, and my interview with Greg Prince from Faith and Fear in Flushing to discuss Mets fans hoping the Sox break the 1962 New York Mets record, while the players on that team hope they do not. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dub or at Locked On White Sox, or email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day. See you tomorrow.